The House returns from its August recess tomorrow ahead of a deadline to avert a government shutdown. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy is facing pressure from conservative Republicans to pass their priorities, but those provisions have little chance of making it through the democratically controlled Senate. Lawmakers of both parties have until the end of this month to pass spending bills to keep the government fully funded. For more, let's bring in CBS News congressional correspondent Nikole Killion. Nikole, I'm not going to burden you with a question about what's going to happen, just with a question about where do things stand now?
Yeah, please don't, because I think the short answer is we simply don't know. Look, I mean, there are a lot of variables here, and right now it's just a matter of everyone not being on the same page and people kind of driving in parallel lanes. You know, here in the Senate, you have lawmakers preparing to move forward on a minibus or a set of appropriations bills as soon as tomorrow. Over in the House, they're also prepared to move forward on a series of appropriations packages. But the bottom line is they don't think they can get through it in time. So there is talk of doing a short-term funding bill or a continuing resolution. And that's where more disagreement lies, in the sense that you have, particularly among House Republicans, some who feel that any type of funding should be tied to potentially opening up an impeachment inquiry into President Biden. You have other Republicans who disagree with that idea and simply want perhaps more border security money in some type of short-term spending package. And then here in the Senate, you have some lawmakers who want to make sure that Ukraine is funded properly, that military operations there get due funding and aid. But over in the House, there are many members who don't feel that way and want that aid stripped out. So again, not everyone on the same page. And so I spoke earlier today with Congressman Chip Roy, who is one of the lawmakers who opposes any type of short-term funding package. And I asked him what he would say to some of his Senate Republican colleagues who don't want to shut down.
They're just being Senate Republicans, and the American people are tired of it. The Senate Republicans have never found a fight that they want to shy away from. I think they should actually stand up.
So even though a lot of lawmakers are on different pages here, one thing that is consistent here in the Senate is that whether you talk to moderate Republicans or more conservative Republicans, they're pretty much in agreement that they don't think a shutdown is a good idea. But over in the House, some, like Roy, are willing to take that risk.
Cole, as you well know, Washington is a city with its own language, particularly on Capitol Hill. A minibus is not a vehicle. You know that, but our audience may not. An omnibus, what does that mean? That means all the spending bills put together. That's where omni comes from. Minibus means some of the spending bills put together, a smaller package. But if I heard you correctly, Nikole, there aren't the votes in either chamber for either a small minibus or a large omnibus. So we have to find some other resolution. Is there any path to that resolution?
Well, right now it seems everybody wants to get off the bus, but I guess to be more specific in terms of this minibus, I mean, look, I think there is some consensus in the Senate that they want to move forward with a series of different appropriations packages, which is why they're teeing up that vote for this week. And keep in mind, a lot of this stems from that debt deal that was reached last spring, where there was a commitment to try to return to regular order, where, you know, the government is funded under these appropriations bills instead of kind of these short-term funding stopgap measures. So that being said, that is what they're trying to start the process of doing by moving forward with a series of some of these appropriations bills, not all of them. And again, because it will take some additional time, that is why some believe that there is a need for just a short-term funding gap until they can get through all 12 of these measures. So again, it seems like there's consensus in the Senate, but over in the House, there's a lot of disagreement simply because many House Republicans want to go back to fiscal year 22 measures. This was something that they kind of pushed for in that debt limit deal, didn't fully win agreement as far as that particular parameter. And so that is where there's some disparity, because in the Senate, they are open to additional funding, but over in the House, they want to pare things back. And so that's kind of where we could see both chambers at loggerheads, in addition to both chambers kind of having their own issues with some of the bills before them, if that makes sense.
And Nikole, we've got about 45 seconds left. I just want to drill down on the point you just made. So what House Republicans want to do is they want to go below the negotiated spending limits achieved to avert the debt ceiling default. Is that correct?
More or less. I mean, that's kind of what they want to do. But again, you'll recall when that debt limit deal was reached and there was this notion of trying to go back to fiscal 22 spending levels, that wasn't necessarily what was agreed to, but rather it was agreed to that funding levels would be kind of frozen at current levels. And then you had lawmakers over here in the Senate who believed that there should be some supplemental aid for Ukraine and wanted to add that in. And that is still part of the debate, at least with respect to not only long-term, but the short-term funding measure that is before Congress.
And you throw disaster aid in there, and it becomes a very, very difficult proposition. Nikole Killion.
It's a big, big bus.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Buses everywhere, just no riders yet. Nikole Killion, thank you so very much.